Welcome to Maine, we're stretched to the bone. Prices keep rising, the paycheck stays prone. Inflation keeps knocking, won't leave us alone. They're selling the lie, groceries climbing, the gas tank is low. The bill's hitting harder than snow, but silence still blankets the truth. Where does it go? They're selling the lie. Housing is gridlocked from Portland to the county. Workers commute far past what feels soundly. Talk of solution comes yearly, not loudly. They're selling the lie. They're selling the lie. Say every voice counts, but watch who gets lifted. Some stories vanish, some get the spotlight shifted. Depends on what trends and what keeps them gifted. They're selling the lie. I won't believe them, I wanna believe, but truth's always stuck in between. Static and spin, drown the signal again. Nothing is what it seems. I wanna believe you, but every headline turns daylight into redesigned skies. Facts get twisted, context missing. We choke on the simplified alibis. Wanna believe you, but all I see is shadows where the answers should shine. The fact is
Welcome to the Muddy Waters Podcast, where Mainers tell their stories, unfiltered.
Good evening, Maine. Welcome to the Muddy Waters Podcast. As always, I'm your host, Chuck Ellis. And we exist, as you all know at this point. We want to tell Mainer stories unfiltered, as the intro suggests. But also, we're here to shine the light on things that the mainstream media doesn't want to talk about, doesn't want to interview people on, and things like that. And so my goal is not to tell you everything that I know and learn everything and be a smart you know what, but instead is to bring people on and interview people from around the state to help us collectively learn about the political process better and better understand the people and the players involved, whether that be individual citizens, people in politics, or people running for office, as we have today. My goal is to help the people better understand what's going on and give them more access to what's happening and who's running. And so today we are fortunate to have with us candidate for Congressional District 1, Josh, I'm going to say Pietrowicz.
You nailed it. Yeah, Joshua Pietrowicz.
Right.
That's me.
All right. I want to call you Petrovsky, but
That's Joe. He's up in Kennebec County.
Yeah. So Pietrowicz. Okay. And it looks like I might have spelled it wrong. So I apologize.
That's okay.
Thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks
for stepping up, running for political office in the midst of this insane time. And so, to kind of get started, what I like to do, especially when I'm having somebody on for the first time, is give people an opportunity to know who you are, where you come from, and why in the world you want to run for political office. And then I think we'll get into some of the other elements of why you want to run for this particular seat. But what? Because I know that you've run for some stuff in the past. So tell us the story. Where do you come from, and what have you been up to, and what brought you here?
So, I guess to me, it all starts back in 2008, the McCain-Obama election. My grandfather, before he passed away when I was 9, he was a big, and I say big because he had an 8-foot by 4-foot McCain sign on his garage, McCain guy. And the thing that he always told me about McCain was, no matter what, both parties, they agree a lot on policy, but they have some differences and stuff. And back then there was some real things that he pointed out. But the thing that he drilled into me as a Christian is that McCain was a decent enough man that when it was challenged by the base that, Obama was, a terrorist and not a family man. And, this is in 2008, 2007. McCain would defend Obama at least as being a family man and being, someone that's in the arena. And I think that is an homage that, I've learned throughout since then that, Roosevelt called to us to be, is respecting the people in the arena, because it's really a challenge to get up there and say that, the attacks can come to me. And that's where the buck stops, is, can't go past. But that's something that, was really instilled upon me, is that, it's our generation's call to pick up the torch at some point. And if nobody does it, we're going to drop it. So I've seen this kind of transition where it seems like the boomers have, come on for one last big win in 24, and that's amazing. But at some point, they term out, and we've got to have a succession plan. And it doesn't seem like we've really got one lined up that's going to be a winner. And that's, I guess, one reason why I'm running, is we've got to do something different. We'll get into as far as why this seat, but since 1994 we haven't won this seat as Republicans. So I guess why not give it a shot? Because I'm a full measure kind of guy. So if I've loaded and packed the powder, I'm gonna light the fuse. And so that's the whole point of a primary, and everything else is you get to see who can get the shot off first, I guess, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. So, you said you've run for what have you run for so far in the past?
Oh, if you want the laundry list, I'll give it to you. So in 22,
Yeah.
I ran for state rep as an independent. I got about 11.4% of the vote up in the Glenburn area. And then in 23, I ran for municipal office, ran for mayor of Lewiston. I got 5%. So I really got my teeth kicked in there coming home. That was fun and a good experience. But also it was a time where, campaign season was kind of suspended in October of 2023 for the remainder of it there. So that was okay. And but really a shame where the city of Lewiston's at right now. I'd love to see some real changes there, but we'll see. Hopefully they've got a good election this year as well. We'll see how that goes for them. But after that, I did run as a write-in for once in 2024 for state rep, and then following that in 2025, I was a candidate for select board in my town, where I got 400 votes and lost by about 160 or so votes. So that was my most recent stab in the political arena. And I've never had the opportunity like this to take time off and commit full time to a run. So that's what I've done. I was a prior Toyota salesman for the past 2.5 years at Emerson Toyota in Auburn, and give a 1 month notice, and I'm going on the trail, guys. And so, whether I've got a job when I get back there or not, I'm, all in on this, and we'll see how it goes. But, I think that's the only way you could ever beat somebody like an entrenched incumbent, is to have a candidate, no matter how dark their horse is, they've got to ride at night all the time. So that's kind of my goal, is out there, at least 6 days a week. I still respect the Sabbath, just take it wherever you can. I don't necessarily think you're contrasted to one day or the other, but, it's good to still take your rest. But by all means, you got to work daylight to daylight, as far as I'm concerned, whether what you're doing is, just, Facebook posts and things like that, interacting with your base, or out there knocking doors. I think it's really critical to actually have somebody that's going to have the energy and the vigor to win. And so, now that I've got a little bit of, my almost political college in my 4 years of experience, I would say, not necessarily, but firsthand experience sure beats a degree, in my opinion. And, I certainly know how to file my fair share of ethics reports as well. So, you know, we'll see how it goes. But I've learned a lot from, many mistakes. And I've also been able to meet great people and learn from their mistakes as well. It's one thing I love, is asking questions and stuff. And, not everyone's a winner on their first try. Not everyone needs to be either. Where would this country be if Reagan didn't run again after 76? He wouldn't have been there in 80. So, you got to keep going sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about a couple of things. So like, I want to get at your title and kind of like what you're running on. And then there are other questions I have about like primary opponent, that kind of stuff. And then, but like, let's like what so I titled this because I asked you what would be a good title for it to define your campaign. And you said, make America affordable for Americans. So I assume that part of your platform has to do with that. But like, tell us, like, what is your platform? What are the main issues? Because there's like 176 different, I'm being a little facetious here, but different like things that are all equally very important. But like, what are the core elements of like what you're running on in 2020? Geez, what year are we? 2026. It's hard to keep track. Yeah.
That's okay. I mean, yeah, we've got to make America affordable for Americans. And what that is not just a slogan. It's to end the money printing. Congress, since I've been born, has taken this debt from astronomical already in 2000 to, completely maddening. And it's something where if you look at it in relation to GDP, that's where things get scary because, if we're the leading world economy and we're not even at 100% of our debt as far as, gross domestic product, we're well past that, about 130 or so percentage right now of what we, have an annual yield in our economy nationally. And it's just crazy to think that, that just all sounds Greek to some people. But when you go to open your checkbook at the end of the month and you realize what you got there and what you're going to go buy and what you still have left to buy, and did you even tithe yet and everything else like that, you got to think how quick it comes in and how quick it goes out. And that's something where we've seen, especially since 2020 with the whole COVID pandemic and the money printing. I mean, the Inflation Reduction Act sounds like a great name for an act, but if you look at what the guts of the bill were, it was quite the contrast there. And so we just need people that are going to read the bills before voting on them. And that's not always the case, because a lot of times, if they're going to rush it through, you just got to vote no to blanket stop it or table the motion or something, because it's just ridiculous to expect somebody to read a 300-page bill in 3 hours or less or something like that. And sometimes that's how it goes, is when they've got the votes, they're going to instantly shove it through. And so I like one-page bills. I like, simple things. Obviously, if it's 50 pages, great. I understand it. It's, the federal government. But there are certain acts of legislation that, the one big beautiful bill sometimes was too big a lump sum. And there's a lot of great parts about that I would have loved piecemealed and passed. And I think it's just kind of cowardly sometimes when you have the votes and the numbers to not do it. And some people could say that we didn't, but I don't think that was the case. And I think you've got to take it to a single issue each and every time. Like, do Americans want no tax on tips? Yeah, absolutely. But do they want to stop at $25,000? I think a lot of folks would have loved for that to be 50, but there was never any discussion on it. Same thing with overtime. We talk about all these people that are working hard and stuff. Like, there's certain things that are amazing that out of that, but we also could have held it to a higher standard. And that's where we're in it for a more perfect union. And as a Republican, if I've got to be the voice of dissent on my own side, so be it. I think it's more important that we have a more perfect union than we have a more perfect party, So sometimes we strive for that good looking angle and stuff, and let's just get it done once. And realistically, if we're leaving out the little guy in any capacity, or just doing a piecemeal, a partisan favor, then what's the point? So I'd like to really see things passed in full in single issues at a time. So that way, when you do have unanimous consent, you can roll with things. But, when you're gridlocking on certain things, it's just going to stuff things up. And that's the Washington that I've seen my whole life that I'm running for to change, because it's just ridiculous. And it needs to at least get moving on. That's the biggest thing. I don't think it's ever going to come to an end. I'm not too ignorant to say that, because there's going to be a kid after me and a kid after that, it's going to come along and grow into that. But I think what is important is that we have a system that they can inherit that's better than it was. And that's something that I haven't seen in a lot of years.
Yeah, I mean, that was a lot. But I think there are challenges, obviously, in Congress. One of the biggest problems that I think Trump has in being able to enact his agenda is being able to get Congress to pass things that make sense. And I think that one of the problems is this: we've got to do everything together. And I'm not going to give you that unless you give me this, even though everybody knows that there needs to be reform in this area. Everybody, because of that, they all feel like they have leverage. And so everybody's putting in their requests for, this is what you have to do to please me. And that's where we get these huge bills with a bunch of things that shouldn't be there and some things that should be there that aren't. But so you're going for a single issue bill, and otherwise you're going to vote against it. So just kind of theoretically, you get,
but in mass, I got to know what I'm voting for. That's the biggest thing.
Yeah.
I'm not going to vote for 10,000 things at once and not know what any of them are. That's ridiculous. I could vote for 40 things in one item and have read it through. It's a 300-page bill that we've worked on committee for a year. That to me makes sense. Those are two very different things. I'm not going to be a rubber stamp for you put two things together, I'm voting no. I think that's a little harsh on it, but I certainly, if I don't in my conscience know what I'm voting for, I'm not going to vote the money to spend on it. And that's where it's my due diligence as a representative to look into those things, and every other member of Congress. But so seldom does that truly happen, and that's what I think is important. We have to shed light on that. Every time they try to slam a vote through, within a very short period of time on a big piece of legislation, that's where, using that platform in the bully pulpit as a member of Congress to shed light on those things, that's your job. So that's what I would more do, is take principled votes when you need to.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. Cause I was going to say, how do you get anything done? Unfortunately, with the Congress as it currently exists, it would be hard. So that makes sense. I mean, I honestly, though, I say that, but if we could oust Chellie Pingree, for instance, I don't doing what, even if you voted no on everything, you'd be doing better for us than Chellie Pingree is, right? What is she currently doing that's helping the people of Maine? All I know is I went to one of her town halls
First one in a while, if I remember, Chuck. Yeah.
Yeah, and it was very exciting to be there. I actually met some nice people that I stayed in touch with for a while, that wanted to like try to find middle ground in America. The problem is
There's plenty of them.
there is, but like one of the people that was the closest to wanting to find middle ground, I was like having conversation, we're like agreeing on a whole bunch of stuff, and then I'm like, what's the big issue that holds you back from why is it that you vote Democrat? You seem like we agree on a lot of these things, that things are a little bit more complicated. And yeah, do I agree 100% on everything with Trump? No, I don't. But like, there's a lot of things that are really good, right? And like, and even like a recognition on some of the core issues. We didn't talk so much about Trump, but then I was like, what is it that's got you voting Democrat, right? And she's like, well, I have a nephew who's trans, and it's like, and that's it, done, dunzo. And like this, 8-year-old or whatever, they supposedly knew, I don't remember what gender, what sex they were, but that they were the other one. And so it was like, then that's the barometer for them. And it's really hard to argue with, but Chellie the whole time was just stoking fear and stoking anti-Trump rhetoric. That's the entire, it seems like her whole mantra right now is Republicans bad, Trump bad, and really there's nothing else coming out of her mouth.
If you listen to her just for any point in the last 6 months, I feel like you'd be honestly shocked that there was even going to be a midterm election where Democrats were going to appear on the ballot based off of her rhetoric. She just seems so far polarized to the left that, there's a coup going on in Washington essentially almost daily. And that's just what the same, on loop has been since basically, she was a Russia hoax gal back in 2016, 2017, and so what are you going to do? She's just beating the same dead thing, and I don't know. So I think the American people eventually see through stuff, but they need to have a nominee that's better. People need to vote for somebody that's better than Chellie Pingree. And they have to be inspired in the sense that, she fights for farmers in her everyday dialogue and stuff. That is, I think, something she champions herself for. And I think there's a lot of people out there that see the need for that. They see what China is capable of disrupting, U.S. agriculture and stuff. And so all of the other factors as well. And so I think her being an advocate is one of her I'll give her a compliment, one of her best characteristics for U.S. agriculture. Whether she's right or wrong on the issues, she certainly comes across as a champion for that issue. And so that's probably one thing where,
big
Castle District.
Big agriculture, big food, or Maine smaller business farmers?
That's where you got to read the voting record every time, right? Because how can you say that you're for actual Maine agriculture and be part of the Paris Climate Accord, and stuff? It's little things like that. But as far as if she was at your local farm stand in North Yarmouth, would you think that she's all on your side? I'm sure, but that's where, those candidates with charisma, sometimes they get you. And so I think you just got to read through and look at the record every time. It's not about what you say, it's about what you do. And so,
but what she says is she defends U.S. food and doesn't tell you that it's primarily big ag.
Yeah. Look at the money.
Big food, which is that must be why she must hate and we'll move on to some other things, but like she must hate what's his name there, Robert RFK, because our big food doesn't like RFK because RFK wants good food, not big food, healthy food, not major corporations.
I mean, I support making America healthy again, and the first step was getting all of the carbohydrates from the base of the food pyramid, gutting that, because I can tell you this, as somebody who's been a big guy myself, that was a lie that was been in place for decades.
I remember as a kid, it was like, oh, great, I'm going to eat another bowl of cereal, right? Like as a kid, like I was very active as a kid, so I still was in pretty good shape because I played like 7 sports, when I was in 6th or 7th or 8th grade, whatever the heck it was, where I was on that many different teams. I played multiple different teams of different sports, and and so like, okay, yeah, having a lot of carbs at that point, that's a good idea, but like in general, no, that was like, it blows my mind. It's kind of like goes back to like the cigarette thing and the current trans thing where they're just like, oh, the doctors confirm. And it's like, okay, excuse me. Like you've told us that the food pyramid was good and healthy and accurate. And you told us that smoking was good. And now you want us to believe you on this other issue where you have a track record of saying what is convenient and what profits some and harms the people. So I don't trust your medical system. But anyway, this is me talking way too much. So
We can transition to the fact that I don't believe in for-profit medicine anymore. I mean, I think we've gotten to the point where what's the point? We've had penicillin for quite a few years and everything else that's come from that, which is great. But at the end of the day, when are we going to say no to corporate greed? So whatever we're talking about
challenge
there,
there,
to go in there.
Oh, go ahead. No, but like the challenge though, that I would say in that category, is like if you don't have an ability to make money off of something, you're not going to get innovation, right? That's the challenge. Like if everything becomes nonprofit, then where does innovation come in the medical space? And so that's where there are some creative ways that I think you could encourage innovation and the ability to make profit, but maybe you limit how long a company has, and maybe even limit how much their profit margin maybe can be, so that they're not like, I've got this new drug out there, it's saving lives, but we're going to charge $1 million when it takes me $1 to produce it. Okay, yeah, maybe we've got some legislation to protect there, but you have to anyway. The danger, I agree that there is a huge corporate greed problem in the medical.
Why can't you cap medicine with a 400% profit margin? 400% profit margin. That's what
generous.
That's what most restaurants operate off of, as far as, if you're going to sell a hamburger for $19, you got it for somewhere in the vicinity of $5, let's just say, give or take, right? And then you're going to try to get, a loss leader. And obviously you've got other things that you got to build in as far as, labor and things like that. But as far as the products go and the ingredients and getting them there and paying for that, you got to build in other things. So I don't know, wherever you set that bar, there has to be somebody that's going to be an advocate for the American people with that. And that's my real thing. Is it seems like, to me, one thing I loved about Susan Collins is she had one of my friends' dads go down to Washington to testify because his son was diabetic, or is diabetic, and type 1 diabetes, it's what are you going to do 10 years ago as far as the cost of insulin? It was ridiculous,
Yeah.
It's still, medicine is still expensive, but at least there's been certain things we've been able to do to progress along with that. And I think that's important to have those safer barriers there, but you've got to install them.
I thought Joe Biden said a couple of years ago that he beat big pharma.
Yeah, well, I think we know how that quote went after that.
Yeah. So, all right. So you're a Maha guy. You want to help fix the healthcare system, partly by going after big pharma.
Yeah, I mean, in principle, yeah, of course. I don't think necessarily I'm any one way or the other guy. You're never going to see me out in the red cap. Let's just be honest. I probably had 1 in 16 riding the wave because I was making phone calls as a kid, but I am my own man. I think each individual issue is what's important. I think the reason why I'm running as a Republican rather than as an independent is simply because you can't alienate 1/3 of the country unless you've already have incumbency status, like somebody like Bernie Sanders or Angus King. It's just so hard to break through. And I think, picking a party and winning a primary does produce things within a candidate that make them more viable for a general. So I also think that's a good thing. And that's just been my experience with that. But yeah, make America healthy. It's a great slogan. Are there, was I on the Tylenol kicking train for pregnant women? I mean, I think that was an easy thing to say 10 years ago, right? You just don't take it. But I don't know why we had to make a press conference out of it and waste a day in government, I guess is my point. I like efficient government. That way it can be small government. So, there's a lot of, I agree with that for sure.
Yeah. So what are the other issues? So number one, I've got, you recognize issues with the deficit and single. You don't want like these omnibus bills that you don't have a chance to read. You wouldn't want to vote on that. And then, make America healthy. What are some of the other issues? Like I'll go back to your title. Maybe you could talk a little bit about this, right? Make America affordable for Americans. So what do you mean by that?
I mean, I wouldn't mind expanding the child tax credits so that way families that are, trying to grow and stuff have the opportunity to do so. Because it's sure nice every February getting a few extra $1,000 back because, you got a few extra mouths to feed. And that's how I would look at that, I don't have kids yet, but I see so many of my friends that do. And we know what it costs for diapers and what it costs for, any type of pregnancy without health insurance, let alone. So just every other aspect of childcare and stuff is very expensive these days. And so why not? I mean, to me, if you've got a birth rate that's below replacement and you don't want to use outside immigration, because I don't believe that's the best use of the problem, why not incentivize people to have kids and have them in the nuclear family that we trust the most, which is American nuclear families? We need people here making babies, and I think that's a great thing. And I love seeing a covenant honored between husband, wife, and God. I think that's a beautiful thing. So when that's fruitful multiplication, I love that, as a Christian. And so I absolutely would love to see people, regardless of their faith, have the ability to have kids in America and, be able to afford it. And the child tax credit is something, if you expand it, helps out directly. So a lot of people want to talk about cutting taxes, and then they get elected and they cut taxes for the very upper elites percentages, the 0.1%. But if you do something for the broader 80%, I think everyone would appreciate that. So that's not necessarily cutting taxes, it's an expansion of a tax credit, which then relieves to, they get more back. So I think it's wise. That's one example.
I would agree with you. I think as a society, we need to, again, as you said, we're below replacement rate. That's a problem. And how the current government I say current government, not Trump, but how the previous government, a lot of governments from trying to approach it for the last number of years is let's import enough people who will work for low amounts of money, but will subsidize their housing. And it's like, if that's what we're doing to be able to replace ourselves, why don't we just subsidize our own people? If we're going to spend money, right? If we're going to spend money or we're going to credit money back, why don't we credit it back to fix the problem? What do you think about, because I've been talking to some other people about one of the other challenges that families face, which is childcare. What do you think about, is that something that you would also be interested in supporting, some sort of a credit associated with childcare?
That's one thing where education is one of the greatest expenses in this country, right? Just, it's not the single greatest, but it's up there. So to add to it is one thing. And I like seeing people stay home. I think one of the things where the European countries just slam us, and I got to admit, the Democrats are probably right about this one, is when you do have the kid, being able to stay home longer is great. Now, I'm not saying you need to be able to just take 6 months off when you had a baby, but 8 weeks is not bad. 12 weeks isn't bad. I don't know where you draw the line, but things like that. And then as you get into, not everyone's got a grandparent around, but do we subsidize it if they don't? Or do we pay grandma to watch the grandkid if they do? I don't like that idea. So I think you have to look at something where, you had this kid, you're expanding the tax credit. We're more saying, here's your money back, do with it what you will for this expense, rather than here's more money for this expense that you can bill us for so we can get the expenses even higher, which I think is what government programs tend to do. Is, you might start off at something that's, $3 billion, and then all of a sudden 10 years later it's $5.5 billion. You're like, how'd that happen? That's beyond the rate of inflation. It's like, well, you see, we expanded the program and, other things, which it sounds great and stuff, but what if we just gave people their money back in order to cover those expenses, So so leading into that, you get out of the very early portion of, hey, you just had the kid, maybe stay home a little longer. I'd like to see that. We got to figure out how we're going to pay for it. But that's a really good idea, because that is very intimate bonding time for a family. And we don't want to see something where, we spike the birth rate and then we also spike the divorce rate because, hey, we just had all these kids and it's a heartache, right? Let's just try to make it easy on everyone, as easy as possible, so they can grow their strength as the world gets harder. So that time together is very important, in my opinion. But then maybe having a pre-K system that's expanded. You see that in certain states and stuff, maybe a federal program instead of kindergarten, but that's expensive. It's expensive, Chuck.
It is expensive, but there's also the other element that you're, especially on the conservative side, you're running in a state where we don't really trust the school system. Now, obviously, you've got a general election to win, but I want my kids. I don't have kids yet. Hopefully, it's something.
In private school, homeschool, if you can.
Well, that's I'm already there, right? I'm already convinced, but okay, what do I have to do to make enough money so that my wife can do exactly what you said, stay home? It's interesting that you talk about this, and I think that there's a lot of studies that you could do out there that will there are calculators actually that you can use to figure out how worth it is it for both people to work. Now, the feminists are probably going to get mad at me and say that you should never discourage a woman from pursuing her career. And I would say that the purpose of a career is to provide for your family. And so if your family is provided for, what's the point? Like, I don't go to work and be like, oh my gosh, look at me, I did all this stuff, I've built my career. It's like I go to the job to make money. I go there to make money to be able to provide for my family. And
I think there is a small percentage that's like, I like the job, and so I'm in there for that is not
sure.
Yeah, that's maybe the waitress job once a week rather than the 6 days a week grinding out 80 hours of your life. Yeah, you're right.
But even if you like it, you don't like it to the point where you would do it for free, right? Like because you're doing it. Yes, it's good to try to find a job that you like and enjoy. Like I used to work in banking, and I like advising people on their finances. I'm willing to do that on the side if anybody needs assistance. But I do like to do that. Yeah, the plug there. Yeah. But I do like to do it, but I can't do it for free because I need to make money in order to be able to live. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the primary reason that I seek employment. Right. And so anyway, but the studies, there's a lot of data out there that would suggest that the amount of money that you make from that second person having a job, after you factor in childcare, after you factor in all the other expenses that go, you have to have a second car, so there's a car payment, your insurance goes up, you're having to pay for whatever else it is, like professional clothes, like different clothing that you wouldn't necessarily like. All these things that go into having that second person working. When you factor all that in, you're working, 40 hours a week, 50 days, 50 weeks a year for a couple $1,000 more. So when you think about it, it's like, after taxes, is it really, especially because, that additional income causes the tax rate, it's taxed at the higher rate because you're adding it onto the top. People don't understand. We have a progressive tax rate. Right. So that's what it means is like for the first this much money, you don't get taxed at all. Then from this amount of money, you get taxed at this rate. That second income ends up being taxed at the highest rate. So much of it's eaten up by taxes. And then what isn't eaten up by taxes goes to all those other expenses. And so, yeah, I mean, you really got to question the model that we've shifted to, which is both families working and nobody able to take time to take care of the kids. And this is where we have so many problems in the family. One of the biggest struggles in education, and this is supposed to be about you, but I can't shut up. But one of the biggest problems in education is that we don't have parents involved. Why are parents not involved? Well, because they got to work they both got to work jobs. So they don't have time and energy to be able to give their kids what they need, and the kids' education is struggling. Like, if you do the research, you're going to find that the single most significant factor in the success or failure of a child is parental engagement and involvement. How can they do it when they're both working so much? And so I just, to your point, I'd say go even beyond like the first, I think there are also ways where people can do some work from home. Not necessarily like a 40-hour work from home job, but there are things that can be done from home, depending on what somebody's interests are, where there can be some additional access for funding. And again, I would be happy to give advice to people on like ways to use that to your advantage, so you can write stuff off and save even more money on your taxes by having somebody stay home and kind of work a part self-employment out of home or something along those lines. All legal, obviously. Not looking to cheat the system, but like take advantage of the reality of the system. And people just don't even explore any of that because feminism has taught that we need to have both people work, and that, and I know some situations where the dad stays home, by the way, and it works as well. And so like, I think that an approach like that makes a lot more sense and is a lot better and healthier and safer for our society. So anyway, so you're for making sure women who have babies have the ability to stay home a little bit longer. We got to figure out how we can do that.
I don't think you listened to me correctly. I said families stay home longer. I didn't say that you had to go back to the workforce right out of the gate either, because I think it's about the intimacy as a family during that transition, especially for the first one. Like, I would even make a special exemption or allotment, because that transition, everyone else has come along and said, I did it. It's not that hard, not that big of a deal. What's the divorce rate in America?
Higher, like 60%.
Why is that
difficult.
okay? I'm great. It's a fact. But
Well,
don't we want to set people up to succeed? And if it's after the first kid where you're like more likely, or the second or the third, why wouldn't we want to keep that nuclear family together so that way that child, that young American, has the best possible opportunity growing up, which we know happens when mom and dad are around, or mom or dad are around because one of them's working, which is, we know that's going to happen. That's part of the economy. People have to go to work, but to have that family unit as intact as possible, that should be the government's primary focus, not taxing it in the way where it gets broken apart and then we can piecemeal out and give handouts to certain people that we want to help out because they're favorites because of a demographic. I think that's wrong, and so we shouldn't just subsidize things just to subsidize them because we've done in the past. I think we need to look at how are we going to spend our money for the next 250 years, not how we spent it in the last 250 years. And I think that's something where if we're not focused on that, we're going to lose sight of that we have control of the reins and that we can change the direction if we need to. And not every direction needs to be changed. There's a lot of things with, where we are the leader and we need to stay on top and not change. And there's a lot of things where it's like, okay, we're the richest country in the world and we have homeless veterans on our streets. What are we doing? What's the problem? Let's look ourselves in the mirror and figure it out. It's just, every issue is different. But if we can't address it with a fresh slate every time, every session of Congress, why do we label them as a different session,
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So you've made some comments on the way that like you're your own person. You've run as an independent. You're not gonna wear the MAGA hat.
You might see one. I'm never gonna wear it day in and day out. I guess I don't know.
Right. Well, I mean, you suggest like so it's interesting that we live in a day and age where like you're either it feels to me like either you're wearing your MAGA cap everywhere, or people think that you're not enough of a Trump supporter if you're on the right. And then there are some people that consider themselves to be Republicans. I remember I met with somebody from a networking group, and I wasn't trying to talk politics, but he decided to. And he was like, "I'm more of a Republican than Trump, and I hate Trump. Trump's terrible. He's ruining our democracy." And it's like, okay, so you've got that small segment of Republicans that are just like so anti-Trump. And then you've got the other blend where it's like, if you're not like so pro-Trump, then you're kind of looked down upon. I get crap on here for saying that I think that Trump won a great victory in 2024. It's actually monumental, and it was the most important election in at least in my lifetime, if not in our. I don't know. When you look at the future of America, I think it's probably the most consequential one that's going to have happened in the last 50 to 100 years, right?
People wrote the guy off. Totally.
Well, they wrote him off, but also like if the Democrats won, I don't know that we have another free and fair election because of what they're doing with immigration, trying to naturalize a bunch of illegal immigrants who are probably voting
censorship that occurred, in the Biden administration. You couldn't have a dissenting thought on a medical issue without it getting censored.
Yeah, so for the issue of free speech alone, Donald Trump saved the republic, right? For the time being. Now, are we going to stave off ruin? It remains to be seen. But I'm a huge supporter of Trump in the sense that like he's got one of his policy positions are the best that I've seen of any president from a policy standpoint. Like I don't think you're going to see a better president if you actually are paying attention and you know what you're talking about. Sorry, we can talk tariffs because that's one of the big ones, but I think tariffs it was a huge win for Trump and America until the Supreme Court did what they did recently, which I think was a mistake. But I tend to be very, very a huge defender to the point where people who hate Trump just think of me as a Trump supporter, and people who are so diehard Trump think that I don't have enough faith, trust the process, all that kind of nonsense. And it's just like I like him. I think he's incredible. I think what he's done is incredible. My point is that I do think he has flaws. And I think I get crap for that. So you've made it clear in some of your comments that you're not 100% in every way behind the president, which some people would say is like, you're not MAGA enough, but like, I don't know if you want to flesh that out a little bit, obviously.
Yeah, let's talk about it. Like why would anyone be a blind single issue or, a single party, drone? I feel like that's not our duty as Americans. So I don't know. Like I said, I feel like the president and I probably would agree on 90% of things, 90% of the time, and where I come from, that's either an A or a B, depending on who you talk to in the school system. So that is a pretty good passing grade, makes the honor roll. And, that's how I look at it is no one's ever going to be 100%. And no one's 100% perfect. I don't love that he's got a Bible that he's monetized. That's not my favorite thing in the world about Donald J. Trump. But you know what? He's got his spirit. And if that's really God's plan, he's spreading the gospel somehow. And that's truly what's going on. Then who am I to judge? Right. But there's also some things that, there's some quotes out there I don't want my kids to listen to when they're born for at least a few years. Let's just put it that way, And so you can't just say that someone is all good or all bad because only a Sith deals in absolutes, So you mentioned the Republican. That just gets me back to an old Ben Kenobi reference,
Sure,
I just want to give America a new hope, I guess. That's the real thing, is that we can still look and say that, I'll be damned if it's done on my watch because, there's another person that's going to come along afterwards that'll take it along better. But you got to, make them beat you, and do it the right way and earn it. And I think, the handing over of what Donald Trump has built, if that doesn't go to the best man or best woman, that will be the downfall of the republic, because I think you've got to earn it, because Trump earned it twice. I don't think he earned it 3 times. If you want to get into, I think so. I heard this term, low propensity Republicans, they stay home. Let's just look at it. 2020 was a year where if you were a Republican, he was a shoo-in. And Paul LePage says it best: if you're a shoo-in, people stay home because they don't think they need to get off the couch to go vote for you. And there was some Republican pride there. And that's why in 24, that's exactly why he won, because he wasn't in power and people wanted that change and they needed to go vote. And that's why he won all 7 swing states. But I know it wasn't rigged because Susan Collins won her election in Maine. And, I think Susan Collins and I have cut from a similar cloth from different generations. We're not all right on the same issues, and there's certainly things we disagree on. But, Susan Collins votes a conscience, and I have a lot of respect for representatives and senators like that. And I think that's very rare because so many people in Washington, so many people in Augusta have their strings, and they do as the puppet master says, and that's that simple. And those strings are as clear as fishing lines, so you really can't see it unless you wave your hand and look. But that's the thing, is there's no strings on me. So I think that's a beautiful thing for an elected official to be free and clear. And, maybe I'm a one-hit wonder and I don't have the funding, and they pour it in 28 and I can't hold the seat. But if we get in there once and you at least know that you got a rep in Joshua Pietrowicz that's going to vote his conscience every single issue and show up to vote too, I think that's the big thing. That's why you should vote for me over anybody else. Is there's no strings, there's no dirt. And, we're going to just keep on shedding the light. And if anybody's got a problem with that, so be it. We'll keep on marching on. We're here to take ground, not here to lose it. So.
Yeah, no, it's that's a lot. Again, you spew out so much; it's hard to take it all in.
I can cut it down and give you more of a chance to respond. I'm sorry, I'm new at this.
No, you're good. You're good. Well, again, like what's clear is you've thought a lot of this stuff out. You've got a lot of ideas, and you're very passionate. And so, like let's talk about some issues, right? Like, because I think what are the issues that I think Mainers care about?
Taxes on billionaires.
What?
Are we raising taxes on billionaires?
Well, that's I guess I'll let you answer that question. Should we raise taxes on billionaires?
Do you think if you have $1 billion in annual income, that the billion after that should be taxed at 50%?
No,
I think that's my cap. I don't think 39% is good for that second billion and up, personally.
Okay.
And that's at the federal level. I'm not going to touch states or anything like that right now because we're talking about, running for Congress. But yeah, that's one thing where, call me a progressive. I think we've lowered the tax rate. And I think anybody that is able of making $1 billion a year is at that point probably an addict of making money. So let them keep doing their thing, but let's at least recuperate what we can out of them reaping the fruits of the American system. And, that's where I draw the line is at the B, not at the M, because that's a way different gap. And so that I think that's one thing that if you want to talk policy that not everyone is going to agree with me on is I think instead of, I think it's 39%, it should be 50% for after $1 billion. And it's not even, that's the top tax rate, right? I just think you should make them after that, starting at after $1 billion. And whether that's, through liquidating a capital gains tax over a certain time within a certain number of years, rolling that in. I don't know what the metrics will look like because I can't say, because whatever gets voted on and how it gets meshed out of committee and stuff, that's what we're actually going to be voting on. But if it was a baseline, hey, personal income tax at $1 billion north a year, you pay 50% of that, I could support that. There's certain things where I think the progressives are right as far as the rich are getting richer and the wealth gap, the inequality is spread in America. That's just so drastic. You could pull up a graph and look at any type and just look since, 1979 and go on from there, or even further back, really since we got off the gold standard. But, that's something they've got the facts on that. And that's one way where we can, codify in tax code, because I don't think, like I said, anybody that's at, that 10 million or $5 million in a year in income, like, I don't want to shut them down in their ability to earn, or their hunger to earn, or like to want to build a retirement or a better life for their kids. But anybody who's capable of making $1 billion in a year, they're going to keep doing it. There's not anything that's going to stop them, because that's quite the personality trait to be capable of doing that. There's a reason why there's probably only 600 billionaires in America, if that even. So we're talking about a very small percentage of the population, but just because they have that insatiable wealth doesn't mean we can't go back to a tax code like after World War II, where we're in a similar debt to GDP situation where we can solve that and pay it down, because there's no reason we should be in this situation, but we do have to get out of it. So everyone wants to talk about cutting taxes, and it's like, how are you going to cut taxes on the middle class if you don't make somebody else pay for it? And let's make the billionaires pay for it. For whatever that is that we can raise in revenue from that portion, let's cut it for that proportion of people making, under $200,000 a year as a family. Why can't we make those, flushes? And if that ends up looking as we raise the family or the child tax credit, and then also lowered, or raise the standard deduction, something like that, so that way it actually benefits middle class people, that's what we got to do. Sorry, I'll let you get in there.
No, you're good. So like interestingly, I don't necessarily, I think in principle, I don't necessarily think I wholeheartedly disagree, right? Like I tend to be taxes, we just need less of them, not we need to look to take more from some people, partly because my philosophy is I think we need to substantially gut our spending. And if we gut our spending, we don't need to tax billionaires, right? Number one. The problem, if you look at the problem in our society that is potentially creating this inequity, which I agree exists. This is a problem, and if you're at home and you don't think this is a problem, I think you need to do a little bit more research. But the reality is we have seen an increasing divide between rich and poor. The middle class has evaporated. By and large, right? And I think part of the problem, but the problem I don't think is that if that's what you're looking to address, which is my primary issue, because again, I think the spending issue is the bigger problem, and I don't think we need more tax for anybody. Actually, I think we need what we need is an economy that, a tax system that's going to create economic growth without bankrupting us as a country, because I do believe the deficit is a huge issue. And I'm not denying the deficit. I'm saying that I think we get to fixing the deficit through tax cuts, through spending cuts, not through taxing billionaires. But when I look at the issue of how do we address the growing inequity and the divide between rich and poor, I actually think that the solution is kind of twofold, and this will allow us to lead into your issues, because this is all about you. But I can't keep my mouth shut. But I think one of the ways that you address the growing divide is tariffs. I think tariffs because the purpose behind tariffs is to reshore American jobs so that people here have money, and that we're sending less of our money outside of the country, and that also is going to help address that inequity problem and bring back some of the middle class through the jobs that will come back through reshoring. And then one of the problems I'm this kind of weird person, because most Republicans are very anti-regulation, and don't get me wrong, I'm largely anti-regulation, except when it comes. I
hear what you're saying.
Well, I specifically look at things that we'll use the I don't know if they're the big five, but I'll throw out a number of, just for fun. We'll talk about 3 companies: Apple, Google, and Microsoft. If you're watching this or you're listening to this, one of those companies, if not 2 of those companies, are the reason, right? Like, that's just the reality. Like, you cannot access the internet. I mean, unless you're one of those weirdos out there that's like, I use Linux. Okay, I'm sorry. Yeah, there's one in 150 or whatever it is, probably less than that use Linux, right? Or some other form of program. But the most part, we're having to go through one of 3 companies. They have a monopoly. They have a corner in the market, and they are basically driving regulation that happens. And so the problem in our economy isn't necessarily that we have too many regulations, but that the regulations are on the wrong people, right? Smaller businesses that have below a certain percentage of the market share, right? Let's really deregulate there aggressively so that they can compete. But then with our really, really big corporations like the Chases of the world and these 3 companies that basically have a corner in the market, and who can break in? Nobody, because the regulation harms other people, and then their ability to like buy out. So like, for instance, we have antitrust policies that are supposed to stop monopolies from having this kind of power. The problem is we don't follow through on them. We allow Apple and Microsoft and Google to basically buy up their little competitors for really small sums of money, compared to like for an amount of money that Apple doesn't even miss it. They don't even notice that it's gone. It's that small of amount of money, considering the amount of cash that they have, available to them. All 3 of these companies, really, and there's some others that we could throw into the mix. And I think that addressing that issue through appropriate regulation, where the regulations right now basically make it easier for big corporations to drive out the smaller guys who can't handle the regulations. I worked in banking, and I saw this happen in the industry. Your bigger banks are above the point where regulation doesn't hurt them. They've got the infrastructure, no big deal. It's crushing the smaller banks, which is why you see all these mergers, because they have to merge in order to be able to compete. Yep. In order to be able to survive, right? And that's what the regulatory environment has created. Big winners that are really the ones secretly behind the scenes pushing the regulations that they then publicly will complain about, but privately it's why they're taking up more and more corner of the market. So when I look at the inequity issue, I think we address it through tariffs, and I think we address it through fixing where regulations exist in a way that protects the American worker and the American, the average American.
You're right. Sounds like we got tax billionaires, Chuck. Maybe they're just billion-dollar corporations. Maybe we can include that there. That we won't miss those too. Because the other thing is what they're not paying in taxes. If they're paying in expenses to avoid that, it's going back into the economy, right? Which I think is one thing. If you take it out of the hands of the few at the top, the 600 billionaires, and you put it in the bottom 300 million or 330 million Americans, and they're all spending it, that's going to go to their kids' daycare, and that's going to go to their kids, somebody's waitress somewhere, and that's going to go to someone's auto shop down the road and stuff, versus just going right to BlackRock's pocket somehow, or staying in, Larry Fink's, offshore account once it's free and clear, right? You know how these guys go. They've got ways to harvest money through debt that can not touch their assets, so they don't have to pay taxes. It's a beautiful thing when you're wealthy, right? That's what the game that they have that we can play, right? So
some of the games I think we can play. Fortunately, we do have the capacity to advance out of our poverty. It's one of the beauties of capitalism.
That's the beauty of capitalism. Right? Yep.
You could start with nothing and work your way up. Yep. Yeah. I think the corporatism. I think another way that you kind of try to address this too is through making it so the corporation is not a person under definition, so that like there are
Citizens United,
whatever that is. Yeah.
Oh! I just you're thinking about how corporations spend unlimited sums of money, but they have free speech protected, right?
Think there's a problem with calling a corporation a person and giving them the same rights as a citizen. Essentially, in a lot of ways. Obviously, corporations can't vote, but they have a lot of rights of a human being that I don't think were intended by our founding fathers.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's a problem that hurts the average person. Yeah. So
we got to go
all right.
for. It's just average Joe, you know.
Yeah. So what about? All right. So let's move into a couple of other
Yeah.
different like policy areas that I think a lot of Americans care about, and Mainers in particular. What do you think about like what do you think about ICE and what the Trump administration is doing in deporting violent illegal criminals? You know.
Yeah, I mean, I got a really, clear-cut take on this. I think that immigration and custom enforcement is law enforcement, and we've got to support law enforcement. But I also think that they're not perfect. And you look at what was going on in Minnesota, excuse me, just in general with what was going on in ICE and removing stuff. And I think Renee Good, what she did there, where she was driving her car into an ICE agent, I think the ICE agent had every right to fire back in self-defense, or fire in self-defense, I should say. And I think that was, a lawful in the line of duty use of his weapon. And I think we have to understand things like that case by case, because if you look at what happened with Alex Preety, I don't think that we needed to necessarily use deadly force in that instance. And I think that's an individual that if we had, had proper tools to cooperate with local law enforcement, he probably would have been off the streets several days before because of, kicking a taillight of a police car, what was 11 days prior, I believe, something like that. And so when, you don't have the proper channels to follow with due process and, cooperating within law enforcement, it's hard to keep everything going at the same page. So either way, I don't think necessarily deadly force was needed with Alex's death. And that's one thing where I would have loved to have seen justice be handled out unilaterally. And if that was an arrest and he had to stay in his day in court, I think that would have been there's never a good end to any scenario, but I think that would have been the best possible outcome to the instance that occurred that day. So having that in mind, I would just like to see that be the focus of the administration when these instances are going to go on and, people are, interrupting or, impeding law enforcement is what it is. It's plain and simple. You don't have the right to stop a raid or something like that, no matter how righteous you think you are. You've got to get out of the way of law enforcement. So when these people are doing these things, I don't necessarily think we need to have lethal force with responding unless it's necessary because of self-defense. And so there's something in me that just needs to make it abundantly clear that I support law enforcement, but I need law enforcement to follow the letter of the law and make arrests when possible and only use lethal force for self-defense. So if that instance has not been concurrently made clear, then what's the point? If anybody can just go around with a gun and anybody can do something else, that's not the system of rules-based law and order that we have in this country. So we need to hold everybody accountable because we're issuing a badge with that gun, and that's something that's really important, is that there's honor and liberty and justice for all, and we don't get to just pick and choose. So, those are two very different instances, and I just want to make that clear, I guess, because a lot of people will just lump those in. And I think like we've talked about all night for about an hour, it's a case-by-case, scenario-by-scenario. And as the scenario abroad is that I support law enforcement. I support that deadly or, violent criminals are deported, and get pulled out of our country and sent back to where they came from. As far as, what we have going on at the broader, 20 million people coming in over the Biden administration, the system in which we, filter that out, there's got to be a what would Jesus do kind of moment, because if there's not that, then that's not the government I want to be associated with at all. You have to treat people humanely, even if you're sending them back across the border, which if they're here illegally, then that's what they have to do. But we're not going to put people in, inhumane situations. That's got to be an utmost priority. And I'm not saying we do that, but I am saying, as these operations are carried out, which it's not going to occur overnight, there needs to be that mindset the entire time of, even if we are kicking them back to Guatemala or Mexico or someplace, they're still our neighbor internationally. So we better give them 3 square meals, a hot rack, that type of thing, and some warm transportation along the way, and medical care, But at the end of the day, it doesn't need to take 6 months to get them out of the country. If it's something that we can do it quick in 3 to 8 weeks, then why not? Great. But once they're here, they're a problem we have to deal with ultimately. And if a different administration doesn't want to, then like you said, with, bringing people in for past elections and stuff, that's just going to alter the outcomes for sure for in the future as these folks naturalize as time goes by, So I think you have to hold people accountable. If they came here illegally, they came here illegally. But at the end of the day, they got to be removed legally. And so there's law and order when we're doing that. It can't just be we're removing gang members and looking like gang members while we're doing that. So, a lot of folks talk about, masks and stuff. And I think there's a certain need for, members of that community and law enforcement to use that. And I think there's also times where, you just need to see who the police officer is, because there's a reason why you get to know their name of Officer Jones, So, yeah, the SWAT team, they wear a mask too. I get that. If you're going into that type of scenario, then that's what you're doing. You probably should have the right equipment on. So.
Yeah, I tend to be very, very defensive, if it might be the right word, of ICE, and largely supportive, and even even in ways that, like, not in ways, but I tend to be very, and I am, but I also recognize, like, what you're saying is that, like, people make mistakes, and I've not spent enough time looking at the is it Alex Pretty situation. I'm confident, as you said, in good. The other side, I'm not as convinced. I have seen some stuff that suggested that he fired and all that other kind of stuff. But I do think that, these are, I think, both tragedies, and not that ICE is to blame, but like somebody losing their life, like, for driving their car into an ICE agent. It's really sad. Obviously, I think the ICE agent had every, as you said, had every right.
It was self-defense in that instance, by and large, undoubtedly.
Yeah. But it is still, it is still a tragedy, and I think, and so I'm very, very supportive of ICE, but I do think that there are mistakes that do get made along the way, and I think that's what I'm hearing out of you, a little bit more than that.
Yeah.
But I think so
hold everybody accountable. Nobody's perfect, and when they drop the ball, you don't gotta crowd bash them, but if they did it 10 times, don't give them the job, that type of thing.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. And so what about gosh, my brain shut off all of a sudden. I had another question for you. So big issues I think that people care about going forward. What are some other issues that are important that are as part of your campaign, I guess?
I mean, we've got to revitalize national defense. I think that is, by and large, one of the things that I talk about the most running for federal office is we need to be in a spot where we can win a war with China and also win another conflict simultaneously. So if we can't do that, what's the point of having the U.S. military? Why have we spent all this money? Because that's essentially what we had to do in World War II, is we had to go fight in two theaters. And if not, something is going to kick off, it's probably going to be similar to that. So our capabilities need to be unmatched. And, I think the Secretary says it very right, Secretary Hegseth, that our warfighters never need to be in a fair fight. They need to have it so tilted in their favor that it's over before they even start a step onto the battlefield. And that starts with a strong U.S. Navy. I'm a big believer that by 2040, we need to have the U.S. Navy rebuilt to 500 ships. I think a lot of that needs to be destroyers, because it's a lot easier. We talk about a high-low fleet a lot within the United States military, where you have, the high expense, which is aircraft carriers, but to be able to go send a destroyer to Bahrain or to Argentina or wherever else you need at any point for anything, just as a force protection, a humanitarian thing, anything that says that there's a United States military vessel off your shore and it has a U.S. flag and it has capabilities that are offensive, but it also could be used to, protect people. It could be convoys. It could be anti-submarine warfare. That ability to spread out is something we're losing against, our adversary in China, because the gross tonnage that they're able to produce, you can fact check me on this, world, but, in 2025, everything that they produced in as far as gross tonnage was greater in 1 year in 2025 than all of U.S. domestic ship producing gross tonnage from 1946 on combined, because they have just absolutely let loose their production. And what they have for transport shipping containers, they're just so much bigger than we've ever built before. So it's easy to add that number up like that. But the case in point is we don't build things here under the American flag as much as we need to. And we're going to get built in it, or outbuilt in a conflict, which that was always had been our strength in every war we've ever won in the past, is we could outproduce every other economy we were up against. And right now, if the shoe's in the other foot, we're not going to like when we get kicked by it. That's my issue, is we need to have, you talk about tariffs. I talk about tariffs in the sense of national defense. sense. Do we need agriculture to win a war? Hell yeah, we do. So we need tariffs to protect our farmers. Do we need tariffs on steel to protect American steel so we can build these ships? Hell yeah, we do. But we can't do it at the point where it enables our own domestic production to sit back and get fat, so that way they don't compete at the level they should. But it should be something that way we have those industries, so that way when we need them for mobilization, if that ever occurs. And I'm not a war hawk, because I'd like to spend $1.5 trillion in the military each year and never have to use it. But we need to live in a world where if we have to use it, it's there, it's ready to go. We have the baddest people on the planet at our front lines. It's that simple. So.
Good. You answered another question, I think, is like, what is your philosophy around foreign policy? Like,
1 second.
Yeah. Very good. I'll take this moment to say that if you're watching and you haven't already checked out muddywaters.us, we have a number of like fun little items of merchandise. Let's like this beautiful mug. And a number of other things at muddywaters.us, including Clear Stream Coffee. We're the Muddy Waters podcast, but there is, the Clear Stream is kind of, this is what we're trying to do is clear the stream and make it so that people understand what's actually going on. And so the Clear Stream coffee you can order, and all the profits, which are not a ton, will go to the Muddy Waters podcast and help us be able to provide the service of continuing to do this work. And there's some other fun things on there as well. I probably need to clear some stuff out, to be completely honest. It looks like we have at least temporarily lost Josh. I do think there's a high probability he's going to call back in or get back on in just a bit. But yeah, check those things out. Also, please check us out on other forms of social media, whether it's TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, X, or YouTube, and like, share, subscribe, do all that kind of stuff. Part of the reason that we're creating this, and we do a lot of shorts in those spaces. Part of the reason that we're doing this is we're trying to help people of Maine better understand what's going on in our state, and like that's where these shorts have, and I mean the long form content give people the capacity to understand what's going on, but most people don't have the time. I get that. But they can look at short videos that kind of are clips that kind of give people a sense of what's some of the stuff that's going on. And so if you have time, please check us out on all those forms of social media. We are there. We'd love to have you. Please check us out and continue to support the Muddy Waters podcast. I don't know exactly where Josh is. I'm going to give him a little bit more time, but I think we might have lost him for the night. But he is running for Congress, CD1. He has a primary opponent who will be a guest on the podcast at some point in the near future in Ron Russell, but running against the entrenched bureaucrat Chellie Pingree, who needs to be ousted. So whether you're for Ron or you're for Josh, please get out there and vote. Especially in November, but in the primary, pick your candidate, get out there and vote. But in November, we need you to vote for a conservative, because if we're going to have a chance of ousting Chellie Pingree. It might be a tall order. She's very entrenched in this part of blue Maine, but if I'm still hopeful that we have a chance of making some progress at the very least there. So if you haven't checked them out, go to their websites, find them on Facebook, or wherever you find your social media. So, all right, well, I don't see him here yet. Maybe what we'll do is we'll have him back on a little bit later. There's more information that I like to get out of him. I think you probably got a pretty good sense of who he is at this point, but there's plenty more, and I'm sure he'll be doing some fun stuff in social media. So find him, follow him, thank you all for watching. Next week, at this point, we have a guy by the name of William Austin, who is the campaign manager, I think, for the Robert Wessels campaign. Going to talk about the work that he did helping out with Janet Bowden's campaign for Lewiston, and just some of the things he's seen being not from Maine, but being here and trying to help us win in 2026. And so looking forward to that. We'll see you back here on Monday. And if you're looking for a different kind of podcast that's more spiritual in nature, there is a new podcast that has been started called Clear Stream. I mentioned Clear Stream earlier, but the Clear Stream podcast is a Christian podcast with myself and John Andrade, talking through issues of Christianity and how it impacts us today. The clear stream is the one that the source comes from Jesus, and that's the point of that. So check us out. You can find us on YouTube and maybe other places. Who knows? But yeah, thanks everybody.